It took exactly 10 months. 10 months for Dan Bongino to go from MAGA hero to the most hated man in conservative media. 10 months for a podcast host with zero FBI experience to become deputy director of the most powerful law enforcement agency on earth. And 10 months for him to spectacularly self-destruct in a blaze of conspiracy theories, broken promises, and a screaming match with the Attorney General that ended his career. December 17th, 2025. Dan Bongino posted a brief message on social media that shocked Washington. I will be leaving my position with the FBI in January. No explanation, no apology, just a terse goodbye after the most chaotic tenure in FBI history. The man who had promised to restore the Bureau, who had sworn to expose deep state corruption, who had built a media empire on conspiracy theories, quit after destroying his credibility, alienating his base, and proving that podcasting and federal law enforcement require entirely different skill sets. But this story doesn't begin with Bongino's resignation. It begins in February 2025, when President Trump made one of the most controversial appointments of his second term. The announcement came via Truth Social, as most Trump decisions did. Dan Bongino will serve as deputy director of the FBI, great patriot, tough guy, knows how the deep state operates, will work with Director Kash Patel to clean house. The MAGA faithful erupted in celebration. Finally, someone from their side would be inside the FBI, not a career bureaucrat, not a deep state operative, but a trusted voice who had spent years exposing government corruption on his podcast. The FBI Agents Association was less enthusiastic. The organization, representing 14,000 agents, issued an unprecedented statement questioning Bongino's qualifications. He had been a New York City police officer, then a Secret Service agent, but he had never worked a single day as an FBI agent. The deputy director position had historically been filled by career agents who had spent decades working complex investigations, managing field offices, and understanding the intricate legal framework governing federal law enforcement. Bongino had none of that experience. What he had was a podcast with millions of listeners, a radio show that reached conservative audiences nationwide, and a reputation for promoting theories that sounded explosive on air, but often crumbled under scrutiny. His first day at FBI headquarters was surreal. Career agents watched as Bongino arrived surrounded by security, his trademark swagger intact, ready to drain the swamp from inside the nation's premier law enforcement agency. What those agents didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Bongino's tenure would be defined not by reform or restoration, but by two cases that would expose the fundamental problem with appointing media personalities to positions requiring institutional knowledge and restraint. The first case was Jeffrey Epstein. For years, Bongino had told his podcast audience that the Epstein case was the smoking gun proving elite corruption. Listen, that Jeffrey Epstein story is a big deal. Please do not let that story go, he had said in 2023. He suggested without evidence that Epstein had kept a client list of powerful figures who had participated in his sex trafficking operation. He implied that government officials were covering up Epstein's murder in his jail cell, despite official findings of suicide. When Trump won re-election, Attorney General Pam Bondi promised transparency. She intimated publicly that such a client list existed, that it was sitting on her desk, that the American people would finally learn the truth about Epstein's connections to the elite. Bongino, now inside the FBI, with access to actual case files, echoed that promise. The MAGA base was electrified. Finally, the swamp would be exposed. But then Bongino reviewed the actual evidence. In May 2025, He posted on social media, "I have reviewed the case. Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. There's no evidence in the case file indicating otherwise." The statement was clear, definitive, and completely contradicted everything he had told his audience for years. Worse, it contradicted what Bondi had promised and what Trump's base desperately wanted to believe. The backlash was immediate but manageable. Some supporters questioned his findings, but Bongino was still a trusted figure. He had access to classified information they didn't. Maybe he knew something they couldn't see. Then came July, and the joint FBI-DOJ memo that destroyed everything. On July 7th, the Justice Department and FBI issued a 2-page statement that sent shockwaves through MAGA world. The memo concluded definitively, there was no client list. Epstein had died by suicide, and no additional files would be released because they contained nothing but sealed court records protecting victims' privacy. The Trump base felt betrayed. Bondi had promised transparency and delivered a cover-up. Bongino had promised truth and delivered establishment talking points. Conspiracy theories that had sustained conservative media for years were being officially debunked, not by the mainstream media or Democrats, but by Trump's own Justice Department. Social media exploded with fury. Mike Lindell's Lindell TV posted, "Who's still willing to demand real answers?" Influencer DC Drano called it a shameful cover-up to protect the most heinous elites. Even Laura Loomer, who had celebrated Bongino's appointment, turned on him viciously. The trusted insider had become the establishment defender. Behind closed doors, the situation was even more chaotic. On July 9th, a heated meeting took place at the White House. Present were Bongino, Bondi, FBI Director Kash Patel, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, and Deputy Chief of Staff Taylor Budowich. The topic was a News Nation article suggesting the FBI had wanted to release more Epstein information, but had been blocked by DOJ. The article made Bondi look like the obstruction point. It made the FBI look frustrated with Justice Department politics. And it ignited a confrontation that would define the rest of Bongino's tenure. According to multiple sources who spoke to Axios and NBC News, Bongino was enraged. He raised his voice at Wiles. He exchanged heated words with Bondi, accusing her of mishandling the case from the start, of overpromising and underdelivering, of making him look like a liar to his own audience. Pam said her piece. Dan said his piece. It didn't end on friendly terms, one person briefed on the meeting, told reporters. Bongino left angry, so angry that he didn't report to work the next day. Rumors swirled that he had quit. Bongino is out of control furious, a person who had spoken with him told NBC News. This destroyed his career. He's threatening to quit and torch Pam unless she's fired. But Bongino didn't quit. Not yet. Instead, he simmered in resentment while Trump tried to manage the fallout. The president issued a Truth Social post defending Bondi. What's going on with my boys? And in some cases, gals. They're all going after Attorney General Pam Bondi, who is doing a fantastic job. Notably, Trump didn't mention Bongino by name. The message was clear. Bondi was safe. Bongino was expendable. In August, Trump made that even clearer by appointing Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey as co-deputy director. The move was unprecedented and humiliating. Bongino was supposed to be the number 2 official at the FBI, but now he had to share power with someone brought in specifically to compensate for his shortcomings. But the Epstein fiasco was only the first disaster. The second case would prove even more damaging to Bongino's credibility. For nearly 5 years, the identity of the person who planted pipe bombs outside the Democratic and Republican National Committee headquarters on January 6th had remained one of the FBI's most frustrating, unsolved cases. Bongino, during his podcast days, had promoted a theory that the planting was an inside job, that the FBI itself might have been involved as part of a false flag operation to justify crackdowns on Trump supporters. It was a theory without evidence, the kind of speculation that thrived in right-wing media ecosystems, where distrust of federal law enforcement had become an article of faith. As deputy director, Bongino claimed he pressed investigators for answers. He received regular updates. He was personally invested in solving the case. And then, in early December 2025, the FBI arrested Brian Cole Jr. of Woodbridge, Virginia. Cole was not an FBI agent. He was not a federal operative. He was not part of any government conspiracy. He was just a suspect whose arrest completely refuted Bongino's inside job theory. On December 4th, Attorney General Bondi announced the arrest at a press conference. Bongino stood beside her, looking uncomfortable as the case he had spent years using to attack the FB. I was solved in a way that proved the Bureau had been conducting a legitimate investigation all along. In an interview with Fox News' Sean Hannity, Bongino tried to explain his reversal. The exchange was remarkable for its candidness about the gap between media personality and government official. As a podcaster, I was paid to give my opinions, Bongino said. That's not what I'm paid for now. I'm paid to be your deputy director. And we base investigations on facts. The statement was honest but devastating. Bongino had essentially admitted that everything he had told his audience for years, the Epstein murder theories, the January 6th inside job speculation, the deep state conspiracy narratives, had been content created for entertainment and profit, not analysis based on evidence. His former audience didn't appreciate the honesty. They felt betrayed, lied to, manipulated. The man who had claimed to speak truth to power had revealed himself to be just another talking head willing to say whatever kept the ratings high. Inside the FBI, career agents who had reluctantly accepted Bongino's appointment now openly questioned his leadership. He had been right about nothing. His conspiracy theories had damaged the Bureau's reputation. His lack of institutional knowledge made him ineffective at managing operations. His public feuds with the Attorney General made the FBI look dysfunctional. This guy is a freaking joke, MSNBC's Nicole Wallace said on air, echoing the sentiment of FBI personnel who spoke to reporters on background. Multiple sources told MS Now that agents across political spectrums, conservative and progressive alike, agreed Bongino was out of his depth as a leader of the Bureau. By December 2025, Bongino's position had become untenable. The MAGA base that had celebrated his appointment now viewed him as a traitor who had sold out to the establishment. FBI agents who had to work under his leadership saw him as an unqualified political appointee who had damaged institutional credibility. Trump himself had signaled dissatisfaction by creating the co-deputy position and reportedly considering replacing FBI Director Kash Patel with Andrew Bailey, a move that would further isolate Bongino. On December 17th, Bongino announced his departure. The statement was brief, thanking Trump, Bondi, and Patel for the opportunity to serve with purpose. There was no acknowledgement of the chaos he had created, no reflection on the conspiracy theories he had promoted and then abandoned, no apology to the FBI personnel whose professionalism he had questioned. Patel issued a statement calling Bongino the best partner I could have asked for, claiming he had not only completed his mission, he far exceeded it. But the praise rang hollow. Everyone knew Bongino was leaving because he had failed spectacularly at the one thing he had promised to do: restore trust in the FBI. The irony was devastating. Bongino had spent years attacking the FBI as corrupt, politicized, and dishonest. Then he joined the Bureau and discovered that the conspiracy theories he had promoted were false, that the agents he had maligned were conducting legitimate investigations, and that the deep state he had warned about was largely a fiction created for podcast content. But by the time he learned the truth, he had already destroyed his credibility with the audience that had made him famous, and he had proven himself incapable of earning the respect of the institution he was supposed to lead. The Dan Bongino story is a cautionary tale about the danger of appointing media personalities to positions requiring expertise, restraint, and institutional knowledge. It's a reminder that conspiracy theories that sound compelling on podcasts often collapse when confronted with actual evidence, and it's proof that loyalty to a political movement is not a substitute for competence in government service. In 10 months, Bongino went from MAGA hero to cautionary tale. He promised to restore the FBI and instead accelerated its credibility crisis. He claimed to speak truth to power and revealed himself to be a content creator, willing to abandon any theory that no longer served his interests. Dan Bongino's FBI career is over. His resignation, announced with minimal fanfare and maximum embarrassment, marks the end of one of the shortest and most disastrous tenures in Bureau history. The podcast host, who promised to drain the swamp, learned the hard way that reality is more complicated than content, that institutions require knowledge and expertise, and that credibility, once destroyed, is almost impossible to rebuild.